Hi, I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Gators Territory. Alongside me is Graham Hall from the Gainesville Sun. And we're back with On the Beat. Graham, last time, I think for the first time this season, we did not get the prediction right. It was not the game that we expected when Florida faced off against Georgia. That was not the Florida team we expected. They were shooting themselves in the foot a lot of times, something that we haven't seen this season. There was some coach miscommunication between Billy Gonzalez and his wide receiver. So when you look at that game, I think what stands out is defensively for me. They never got off the field, and they were not able to really push Georgia out in third and long. How can they kind of catch up from that?
Yeah, Jackie, I think you really kind of nailed it right there. I think the most frustrating aspect, whether you're a fan or just a fan of really good football, is that it just wasn't a good game on Florida's part, especially how they performed at Death Valley a few weeks ago, going in there to that hostile environment, taking a lead in the second half, where they were just so crisp. Dan Mullen called such a good game. The way that they did against Georgia, everything kind of went wrong, that you just were a little bit disappointed that you didn't see Florida's best performance. Receivers running the wrong routes, missed blocks, missed assignments. Anything you really could name, Dan Mullen said was out there. They couldn't stop, like you said, Georgia on third down, and a variety of ways. Jake Fromm sometimes was able to escape pressure from the pocket. They were able to use DeAndre Swift, really not that a lot, and still establish production on the ground and in the passing game. Whatever you want to point to, officiating, Florida just found ways to get behind and not be able to really get momentum or stay out there on offense until really the fourth quarter. I thought the most impressive part of that game was Kyle Trask getting 14 points in the span of 10 minutes, although that last drive did take nearly 7 minutes and kind of erased any chance Florida had at getting a third one really right there. So that was the most frustrating thing if you're a Florida fan, was Florida was right there against Georgia, and that showed in the post-game press conference. The big thing right now is to avoid what happened last season, is let an emotional loss become two losses, Jackie.
Yeah, I know everything on paper says Vandy is a great matchup for Florida, but I just want to touch on one thing. I know you said this was a great game play calling wise for Mullen. I don't agree entirely. I think he's had better games as a play caller. The LSU game. The only thing I would say, I'm still thinking of that 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and that opening drive where I'm thinking we have a 6'5" quarterback, just put him under center, or even bring Emory Jones. That's when I would want to see Emory Jones. But we talked about that on the meet right after the post game in more detail. So let's move on to Vandy. You mentioned how Florida did well against the rush against Georgia. They kept them to 119 yards, which I would think they would win a game like that. Georgia went in there averaging 236 yards per game. They kept them to 119, and that sort of performance they need against Vandy, because they're going to meet a familiar name, Keyshawn Vaughn. Florida really remembers that name from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone remembers how he kind of torched Florida on the ground early. Vandy jumped out to that 21-3 lead, kind of left Dan Mullen and the Gators a little bit shocked. Everyone kind of remembers what happened after that. Whether you're a fan of the Doors or a fan of the Gators depends on your perception of the incident. Those two coaches kind of met at half field, really went after it, and that kind of sparked Florida, woke them up there in Nashville. LaMichael Pirines run there late in the first half really kind of got Florida back in the game, made it an 11-point game, and Florida was able to get that 11-point win there in Nashville. I don't think it's going to be quite so close this year. I don't think Florida's going to be caught napping. When we talked about this, you look at it on paper, everything kind of lines up for Florida. Their pass defense, Vanderbilt's, is not great. Their rush defense is not great. It's the worst in the SEC. Really what they do really well is what you said. It's Keyshawn Vaughn. If he can gut Florida early and make them pay, it could be a very interesting game, but I think Florida is not going to have a hangover. This team has repeatedly said one of the things that they learned from last year, and one of the things that they've learned in Dan Mullen's 24 games, is that they know how to win right now. This is a team that knows how to respond. You've seen the fourth quarter comebacks. We almost saw one on Saturday. This is a team that I think will not have too much trouble with Vanderbilt, but we'll have to see on Saturday.
Yeah, I also want to see if Trey Dean will continue playing at star, or if they'll maybe rotate. I know Dan Mullen said that he fits the position through the skill set, but Grantham had an interesting comment saying that they're going to try to put him in the right position for him to succeed, which makes me think maybe they are considering moving him. You talked about something about how Vandy's pass defense isn't very good, or is easily matched up against Florida. So this is an opportunity for Florida's offense to really gain more confidence, especially after, there were certain drives against Georgia that seemed to really suck everything. It's like the life of that offense.
Yeah, certainly. I think that you look at Vanderbilt's defense, this is a team that would really have to catch Florida napping and maybe get some turnovers. You saw Florida go out there against that vaunted Georgia defense and not commit any turnovers. Really, that's one of the frustrating things for Dan Mullen, is they found other ways to beat themselves besides turning the football over. If that happens against the Doors with the noon kickoff, the, like we said, emotional hangover, certainly Florida could be in for some trouble. But that's a passing defense that, as you kind of said, is a little bit of a mess right now. And, you know, Kyle Trask is only a few games removed from playing well in Death Valley, going up in the rain and throwing for 4 touchdowns against South Carolina. Despite what he did, 257 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He did play well against Georgia. We've yet to really see Kyle Trask lose a game for Florida. I would be surprised if that happened against a Vanderbilt defense like this.
No, I completely agree. And remember, Florida will be without Chris Bleich on Saturday, who entered the NCAA transfer portal. So expect Richard Garage to start. Actually, when Richard Garage did start, it looked like Florida's offense, especially the running game, was a little bit better when we watched that against South Carolina. So taking that into consideration, Graham, what is your prediction for the game?
I think that Florida wins by 3 touchdowns. You know, that spread is probably right on the money. Really, the only way that I could see Vanderbilt making it a game is, like we said, Keyshawn Vaughn is going to have to carry that team. As Florida fans and Gainesville natives may know, Vanderbilt does have some experience when it comes to getting a running back and going in Gainesville. Ralph Webb is still their career-leading rusher from GHS right up the road. So certainly it could be an interesting game if that happens, but I think that Florida is able to create some turnovers, which they weren't able to do against Georgia. This is a defense that is looking for some turnovers. Everyone remembers Jawan Taylor almost had that one-handed interception there against Georgia that maybe would have got some momentum for that defense, got them off the field a little bit earlier. So I think that Florida does pull out a 21-point or even a 24-point victory on Saturday. The real key is heading into Missouri, knowing that you don't control your full destiny in your hands. They're going to be watching the scoreboard. This is a team that admitted that they were kind of looking at what Georgia was doing when they lost to South Carolina. Knowing that they're not in control of their own destiny, we will have to see how that affects the team on Saturday.
Yes, a lot of things considering mentally in their game. You know, you talked about looking at Georgia and then also the noon kickoff. Florida's had 2 noon kickoffs. That's something that we're going to have to monitor. You know, against Tennessee, they did start off quick here in Gainesville, but against South Carolina, I think it was more to do with the rain than anything about the early kickoff. But I do agree with you. I think it's going to be maybe a 2 or 3 touchdown win for Florida week. Well, thanks so much, Graham. And obviously stay with us on Gators territory as we continue to count down to the big game on Saturday.